I kept praying and saying, what am I to do? What am I called to? Which is a question of self-realization in psychosynthesis. I went to my God and I said, what am I called to do here?
There's 7 billion people in the world. Not everyone's going to get this.
Great day, great afternoon, great evening, wherever this conversation finds you. I am Travis Gray. This is Gray Transforms, and today we are transforming with another special guest. This is my first psychosynthesis teacher. She is a co-author of Transpersonal Psychology of Psychosynthesis books, 3 of them, with her late husband, John Firman, and the author of Stay Present and Love Him, a memoir of her life with John. She's a psychology professor and psychotherapist. And Gila, how are you today?
I'm good. It's nice to be here.
Great. So this is going to be a surprise for people because usually I have like the full beard. I shave my head clean all the time. But right now, you might not know of psychosynthesis, but I am presenting as the father of psychosynthesis, Roberto Assagioli. Just had the opportunity to be in Italy, in Florence, where Roberto Assagioli lived. So I went to the Assagioli archive and I got to sit at his desk and it was all very cool. I have the psychosynthesis book here, but his face on it is also like in the shadows. But you see his goatee is like this. So, and do I resemble Roberto Assagioli?
Yeah.
I'm doing
No,
it?
I think you did a good job.
Okay. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. And it was wonderful when I first got introduced to psychosynthesis through your course in the Masters of Counseling Psychology program at Sophia University. So in 2017, we entered your class and you introduced us to this new orientation of psychosynthesis. For those who don't know, what is psychosynthesis?
I knew you were going to ask that question.
Good question.
Well, it's a question that is such a challenge to respond to. And so I actually went to a quote from Assagioli. I won't quote every word of it, but I thought it was probably the best answer, even though it's not, anyone will still have questions after they hear this. He says it's not a particular psychological doctrine, nor is it a single technical procedure or method, but what it is foremost a dynamic conception of our psychological life.
A dynamic conception of our psychological life.
Yes, and I thought that really captures it, even though it's not very specific, and there would be many questions that would follow after hearing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if I were to, I like that, the psychological conception of our lives. There is a way that I would describe it just based on what I've learned in your class, reading his work. Right now, my dissertation work does dive into exploring free will. So his book, The Act of Will, I've read a lot, but psychosynthesis is an orientation. It's a psychotherapeutic orientation that it's in the word. It's about the synthesis of your psychology, of your broken pieces, your parts, your fragmented structures. It could be caused by various traumas in one's life. This represents sort of the goal is in the name of psychosynthesis. If there was one, to me, would be the synthesis of that, bringing back a wholeness, which brings like the transpersonal aspect to the orientation, I think.
Actually, it's a little bit broader than that. It includes what you just described.
Yeah.
But it also is about tapping into our own truth or spirit or wisdom, inner wisdom or source, whatever we want to call that, and following the invitations of our truth, of our source, whatever we name, we give to it. We could say it's God, Goddess, the divine source, truth, whatever term we give to whatever we conceive to be the greater, is tapping into the messages or invitations of that and beginning to follow that in our life. So it's not just bringing together or integrating our personality as you just described, but it's a little bit more than that.
Absolutely.
In psychosynthesis, we call that self-realization, what I just said.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Because what I say also doesn't include some of the models of consciousness and experience that Roberto was able to create as a part of his understanding of these things. I was really astonished when I visited his home He wrote and read in more than 5 languages, so that was a part of the mission of the archive, was to translate all of his little notes in several different languages into, a coherent whole. I really liked this quote from your book, A Psychotherapy of Love. There seems to be long-standing consensus among major schools of psychological thought that there is a deep and potent process of synthesis, wholeness, and actualization taking place within the developing human being, that this process can be respected, trusted, and facilitated, and that psychological disturbances may occur if this natural process is obstructed or distorted.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I like that one as like a bringing some of those other pieces together as well. So how did you first get into, I know you have an Italian heritage, an Italian background. Roberto Assagioli is an Italian therapist. How did you first get into psychosynthesis?
Many years ago, many years ago, I was living at a personal growth center up in the Santa Cruz Mountains here in California, and I was on the staff. It was a growth center where leaders would come in for weekend workshops, lead weekend workshops or 5-day workshops. And I was on the staff, a staff of about 5 of us who ran the place. We provided the meals, we did the laundry, we greeted the guests, et cetera, et cetera. One of the guys there who was sort of in charge of the staff who lived there I'm not sure how he came across it, but he happened to have Assagioli's book, Psychosynthesis. And he knew I was into psychology already. So he sort of passed it on to me and said, you might want to read this. Well, I started to read it and it was like, it didn't interest me at all. So I just put it aside. I actually didn't even read much of it. And then, I don't know, maybe 6 months later, a year later, I was looking for a therapist, and I wanted a therapist who had a spiritual orientation. And another staff member there at the time mentioned psychosynthesis therapist who happened to be here in Palo Alto and who he liked a lot. And he recommended him. And so I said, okay. So I went to see that person, and he suggested again that I read Psychosynthesis, which I did. And I have no explanation for this, but 6 months or a year later, after the first introduction to the book, it felt like when I read it, I was coming home. So I don't know why. I don't know what changed in those 6 months or that year, whatever it was. But that's how I first came to Psychosynthesis, was as a client and reading his book at that time.
Wow, that's really cool for a therapist to have introduced you to encourage you to read the book.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a strong encouragement, but since I was seeing someone who came from that, it was someone who actually had worked with psychosynthesis. Who had worked with Assagioli himself. He had traveled to Italy, so he had personal and direct experience with it, as well as John did. My late husband, he spent 3 months in Italy working with Assagioli.
Right. So how did you come across John? How did the two of you meet? Another story. He must have already been interested in psychosynthesis before having met you. Actually, I had mentioned prior to starting the recording, I had mentioned that when I went to visit the Assagioli archive, there was 2 people there. I didn't tell you this part, which is they were 2, I think that they were Irish, but the woman, she resembled you a little bit. And I even showed her a picture of you because the resemblance was striking a little bit. I was like, psychosynthesis is making people in a certain way, It was funny.
So what happened was I was a client of that psychosynthesis therapist that I mentioned, and he was a member at that time of an institute that was just beginning to build here in Palo Alto, which became the Psychosynthesis Institute. And there were only about 6 people at that time who were part of it, but John was one of the members of that group. Maybe there were 8 people at the time. Anyway, John was a member of that group. He had come to Psychosynthesis about 2 years before I did. And so I ended up not only seeing a psychosynthesis therapist for therapy, but I also worked in the office and did the administrative chores of the Institute, and also was in training in the Institute, all 3 of those at this very same time. And that's when I met John.
The 2 of you built a really strong bond and relationship and got married and all of those things. No?
At the time, he was married to another member of the Institute. And within the first, 5 or 6 months of my being there, he actually separated from his first wife. They divorced. And we hung out as friends. We were just friends. John I was in love with him, but he kept saying, we're just friends. We're just friends. Boy, it's a complicated story. I guess it's a complex story. That Institute eventually became like a cult. Mm-hmm. And I left it as I saw the handwriting on the wall. He stayed with it. And there was a lot of stuff that happened there. And I didn't see him him for another 10 years, 10 or 12 years. And then one day he came knocking on my door. And I hadn't seen him in 10 or 12 years. And we renewed our friendship. And after 3 years, our friendship developed into a marriage.
Okay, wow. So it was an extended story there. I guess I was going that direction because your books have been centered around love and relationships, and I'm wondering if you could impart some wisdom onto us about how is it that psychosynthesis is helping with relationships and love, and where do you see the interconnections there? The memoir that you wrote is called "Stay Present and Love Him." Where did all this insight come from to have written a book of that title?
Well, I mean, if I just stay with just the title of that book, if I just focus on that for a minute, when John reappeared in my life after 10 years and knocked on my door, again, he was saying we're just friends. And there's so many things that happened during that time. So he kept saying we're friends, we're friends, we're friends. And it was, torture for me because I loved him and I wanted other than just friendship. And so I kept praying. I kept praying and saying, what am I to do? What am I called to? Which is a question of self-realization and psychosynthesis. I went to my God and I said, what am I called to do here? And the message I got one day very clearly as I was sitting in a chapel one afternoon was stay present and love him. And I said, but it's torturous to stay present and love him. It's really hard. And then the message again said, stay present and love him. And so I chose to stay present and love him and follow that invitation, that message that I received that I believed was from my God. And then we ended up marrying a year or so after that.
Wow, that's a remarkable love story. You mentioned the call of self-realization in psychosynthesis. Can you speak a little bit more on that? Is that something that everyone hears that call? Is it something that people need to discover in their lives? What is that call?
Well, we talk about it as a call. I mean, we can think of it as a call for the larger frame of one's life, but also it's a call from minute to minute. It's a call right now as I sit here speaking with you. How am I called to be with you?
Mhm.
Or how am I called to be with something else I'm going to be doing later in the day. So it's a minute to minute call, but it's also a broader call. There's different levels of it. So it's not infrequently that I ask myself during the day, what am I called to right now? If something arises that I'm sort of, quizzical about or not sure where to go or what to do, what am I called to right now? And I try to listen. And we're more able to listen if we are aware of the different aspects of our personality, because there's different aspects of our personality that might not want to hear what that call is and try to interfere with it in some way. But if I know myself well enough inside, I have a better chance of hearing clearly what that message is and then addressing, those parts of me that may not want to hear the message.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I like the invitation or the consistent asking this question of what am I called to right now that keeps you in a present moment, where I think that maybe some people are asking too obsessed even about what am I going to do tomorrow? Man, what am I going to do tomorrow? Well, today is not over yet. So let's think about what we're going to do today.
Yeah, and even at this very, very moment, like I just said, how am I called to be with my body right now? Because I just noticed that I had my arms crossed across each other and kind of tense a little bit. No, I'm called to let go, and so it's called at various levels at every minute if I'm willing to tune in that way.
Really interesting that the spirit of Roberto Assagioli has called me to be Roberto Assagioli today. That's great. I think that I really do encourage people to be asking themselves that same question more often. How am I called to be in my body? How am I called to be in my life right now? How am I called to be? Is a great question. So then you had mentioned the different parts of ourselves briefly. In your class, I was inspired at one time when we were speaking about this idea of subpersonalities, and I'll ask you to elaborate on this further. But I had been inspired by looking at the pieces of myself and naming them. And so the pieces of myself were Travis, my child self, Mr. Gray, my professional self, and then I was wanting to be the third one, which is an attempt at an integration of those, a conflict resolution, a way of being in resolved conflict with the two pieces of the professional self and the Travis self, the child self, to be Mr. Travis Gray. So I would introduce myself anytime we're going around the circle and people are calling on people's names. After that class for many years, I would always, everybody is introducing themselves their first name. I would always say, I am Mr. Travis Gray, because my intention was that all all of me is going to be here right now. I'm not going to leave my playful self at home. I'm not going to leave my professional self at home. My intention is all of me to show up here and now. I'm in transition into Dr. Travis Gray. So Mr. I'm having a hard time letting go of the Mr. and into the Doctor, but we're seeing how that goes.
Well, how does the Mister feel about that?
How does the Mr. feel about that? Yeah, that's a good question. We're in it now. How does the Mr. feel about that? The Mr. feels like a doctor will be harder to. It's a hard thing to adopt. Especially, I'm not a medical doctor. I am a doctor of philosophy in a transpersonal psychology. So it's sort of harder to adopt, and I don't necessarily require people to call me doctor anything. I am perfectly fine with people saying Travis. So Mr. Gray is just having trouble with not being a medical doctor and maybe even being looked kind of like judged for having chosen Dr. Gray. Oh, he thinks he's better than us, or he thinks he's so smart, or things like that. So it's a part of the challenge with Mr. Gray.
So that's the concern of Mr. Gray.
Yeah, I think that is a concern of Mr. Gray.
And I mean, we don't have to take this any further, but do you have anything to say to him about that concern, or how would you? Yeah, just that. Do you have anything to say to him about that concern?
Yeah. So this is beautiful. I just want the audience to know that this is psychosynthesis at work. Anne cannot help it. It is who she is, and it's a beautiful thing. So, sorry, remind me the question again.
The question, and you don't have to respond to it right now, but how do you address the concern, or what do you say to Mr. Travis Gray about his concern?
Yeah, I think I've been in the process of addressing that concern, and it's just a part of it is a concern of, am I good enough, or am I actually of the peers that are considering themselves doctors, like a Dr. Assagioli? Am I considering myself in that same peer group?
Actually a medical doctor, but go ahead.
He was a medical doctor, yeah. But just like other doctors too, like in Italy, I was a part of the Euritos conference, so the European Transpersonal Psychology Conference, and I was surrounded by a lot of older academic professionals that they're doctors. And Dr. Ferrer, I had a post workshop with him. He's been on the podcast as well, Jorge Ferrer. And do I feel the conviction to be of that magnitude, or of that intellectual prowess? And if anything, my experience in Italy was telling me, it gave me a lot of affirmation of yes. So still working on it, but it's feeling more and more comfortable.
Well, I can imagine you sitting down with the two of them and facilitating a conversation between the two.
Yeah. So this is great. She's saying to facilitate the conversation between maybe the Mr. Gray and the Dr. Gray. There's a conflict there. There's a conflict, and there's so many different potential parts of yourself. At the time of being in your class, I had volunteered to come to the front of the room and be an example in the class. And in the class, I was working on some of the conflicts that Travis, my child self, had with wanting to play, knowing that I have this work to do in my schoolwork and things like this. So that was a part of what we did. And we did the sit in a chair, and then I was talking to the empty chair, but the empty chair represented maybe this is Mr. Gray here while I am Travis, and having this dialogue, and then switching chairs and going back and forth. And those are wonderful interventions to use. Where did you first come across that intervention? Was that something that was Roberto Assagioli had been using?
I don't think he ever did, as far as I know, but that's typical Gestalt technique or something.
Sure.
I've been in, years and years ago, I done a lot of personal exploration. I had been in Gestalt groups, and I actually was trained in Gestalt therapy with Irvin Miriam Polster a number of years ago down in Southern California. So that I was familiar with all those tools and techniques. And that's something that's, in psychosynthesis, we talk about there's no particular method or procedure or technique, but we use anything that we know, so whatever we know, like I'm very familiar with Sandplay. So I use Sandplay, or I use, drawing, spontaneous drawing, which Assagioli liked a lot, with spontaneous drawing, or a chair technique, like more or less what we were just talking about. So anything that I've been trained in that feels comfortable to me to use to facilitate whatever the client is wishing me to do.
Yeah, that's great. It's great that Assagioli had such a wise foresight in that way. Like, use any tool that is at your hands. Not everyone's going to have the same toolbox, and he gave the invitation for the future to continue to grow this psychosynthesis. It doesn't need to be exactly what it is today. In the future, tomorrow, it could be very different. And you mentioned that your expertise in having a lot of skill with the Sandplay therapy. Since we don't have images or anything, but in our class, Anne shared with us pictures of her therapy practice, and it's a beautiful log cabin esque kind of feel, and then like a grassy floor, and it has and I'm just remembering this. So it had that much impact, that much kind of therapeutic beauty to me, and then all of these different figurines lining the walls as a part of this Sandplay therapy. How did you get into the Sandplay?
That's a good question. Actually, I only took one weekend workshop, I remember, at the University of Santa Clara on Sandplay. The term Sandplay is actually coming from the Jungian tradition.
Mhm.
So I actually usually prefer to say Sandtray because I'm not coming from that tradition, because it has a lot of rules and regulations and how you do it.
That's funny. Sandplay has a lot of regulations.
I know.
Sandtray has less.
Well, I mean, the tray should be a certain size and it be just, et cetera, et cetera. Now, so I took that workshop, and then I read there was a very, very excellent book on using sand play or sand tray from, I think the title is something about using it with diverse orientations, meaning that no matter what your psychological or psychotherapeutic orientation is, this is a way to use it sort of generically. It's an excellent, excellent book. And so I read that book cover to cover, and I always recommend it. And so I just developed my own way of doing it, and sort of more psychosynthetic way of doing it. Like, and when the client creates a scene, I might ask them, if spirit was present right now, would this change in any way? So a question sort of similar to that. So I bring in, sort of psychosynthesis perspectives on the use of it. So it was more self-teaching, self-taught.
And so you're not only using this with children, you're using this with adults as well.
I never have worked with a teenager, but mostly it's always with adults.
Always with adults.
And it's kind of remarkable when I can remember a few years ago, a man coming to therapy. And usually when someone walked in the room, if they weren't familiar, I mean, it's a big presentation. I think there's 1,000 miniatures there. If they don't know about it, they usually will ask, well, this particular man didn't know about it, but did not ask. And I didn't bring it up. I just, and at some point, I don't remember, maybe 2 months later, it came up in our conversation that he thought that the sand tray itself with the sand in it was a litter box for my cat.
Wait, was your cat in the therapy room too?
No, but he
No.
thought that's what it was about.
That's funny. That's a really interesting dynamic to have a client that is walking in. So you did more. You just didn't use sand tray interventions at all. You used other tools, other things that you have in your tool belt. And so he's walking in there every day into for the listeners, it's essentially a museum of figurines. It's a small room, but it's a relatively good sized room, and then the walls are just lined. So think you're walking in to see Anne as your therapist, and these figures are on the walls every day, and you never say a word about them.
I know.
Funny.
And I never would introduce it unless someone asked. If someone asked, well, what is this? Then I would, of course, explain it. But I just didn't introduce it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So psychosynthesis, it's not just about synthesizing your subpersonalities or things like this. I remember you had introduced us to meditative practices as well of like going into an inner castle in yourself, and maybe discovering subpersonalities in different rooms and things like this. But it's not just about the synthesizing of subpersonalities. It's also a whole psychological framework on life. And so then there's also this egg model. Can you tell us a little bit about this egg?
I will, but I just want to comment because you said castle, and I thought I never use a castle in imagery. And so
Maybe I'm thinking of a house or something.
well, it was a house, but maybe for you it was a castle.
For me, it's a castle.
It's called the model of the personality in psychosynthesis. And it has 3 levels of the unconscious: the lower unconscious, the middle unconscious, and the higher unconscious. And that's what Assagioli really brought to psychology, or to, he was trained as a psychoanalyst to begin with. I mean, he studied with Freud, or he studied Freudian psychoanalysis. And he was always believed to be the young doctor who was going to bring psychoanalysis to Italy. But in the process of doing that, I mean, in his studies, he said, wait a minute, there's just a lower unconscious. There's also a higher unconscious that's repressed. So that's what he really brought to to, I think, to psychology. And so we have, 3 levels of the unconscious. He also included the Jung's collective unconscious, but he didn't focus that much on collective as Jung did. It was just those 3 levels of the unconscious. And
So it was more about the individual, and he really brought to psychology that the lower unconscious is repressed
well, the lower unconscious and the higher
and
unconscious
the
are
higher unconscious.
we repress our joy and love as much as we repress our pain and suffering.
Mm.
And sometimes that's really hard for people to get at first. Like, why would I repress my joy or my love? But we do, usually in response to wounding, some kind of wounding that happens. And we decide that we're going to protect our joy or protect our love and not let it be.
We're also repressing the higher potentials of our unconscious content of our lives. So there's this concept that I really like a lot, and it's been in my exploration on free will in my doctoral work right now. So Roberto Assagioli wrote a book called The Act of Will as well, which I'm really familiar with, but just sticking to this concept of aspects being repressed, the repression of the higher unconscious, is that maybe likened to repression of the sublime?
Yeah. There's a psychosynthesis psychologist from the East Coast. He has now died, but he wrote an article called The Repression of the Sublime.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Abraham Maslow called it Jonas syndrome, but
Okay.
repression of the sublime is, it must be that same author. So what is it about love and joy? What is it about the higher aspects of ourselves that we are choosing to repress? What makes it so hard to accept and actualize or realize? Why do we repress those things?
The hypothesis is that we repress because we are trying to protect those qualities of ourselves that have been wounded or rejected by the non-empathic environment. So if I'm this little kid who reaches out to express my love to this parent, and this parent is always pushing me away or putting me down or something like that, I will then gradually begin to start it's not a conscious process, but I will gradually start holding that love back and shutting it down so that I will not get hurt again in that way. So my love will not be damaged in a way. So when we talk about love or creativity, a little kid who's really creative and then gets criticized and judged for that creativity or told that it was nothing or something like that, I might begin to shut that down in order to not have it be wounded or hurt again. I'm going to keep it to myself. I can remember for me, it was like, you'll never see my love again. Because you've heard it so much.
Yeah. So at one time, maybe this person, they found success in this area of love, of joy. They found this success, but then externally from the people that was most important to them, it was not received in the way that they need it to be received.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes, not received is a mild way to say it. I mean, sometimes it's much more than not received. Yeah.
It meant tremendous conflict, tremendous hardship, abandonment, other things, more intense degrees of what this could mean to somebody. Part of it, in my mind, was that this repression is also because there's kind of an integrated, a built-in reason that realizing our highest expression of ourselves requires effort. It requires exercise. It requires a stretching ourselves into strengthening ourselves. We have to go through some of the traumas and stuff of our initial reasons for repressing these things. We have to kind of go work through those things in order to pop out on the other side. And so a part of the repression is that maybe we are afraid of what the next form of ourselves, what that means if we are to realize everything that we are capable of being.
And I'm not sure that you were saying this, but it sounded like you were saying that we need to go through we have to address or in some way engage the wounding in order for the what was repressed in the higher to emerge in a sense.
Yeah.
And that can happen that way. However, it can happen spontaneously too. That's what I think Maslow is referring to when he says peak experience. All of a sudden, you have an experience of some quality of your higher unconscious that's repressed in your higher unconscious. So we talk about it as surprise by joy. I mean, that's C.S. Lewis phrase, and I think maybe the title of one of his books, but surprised by joy. We can be surprised by pain, but we can be surprised by joy also. And the surprise by joy is that sudden emergence of something that's been repressed in our higher unconscious. So it can happen very spontaneously. And it's not only through work, work meaning engaging lower unconscious wounding, but also spontaneously. And how do you explain that? I don't know how you explain that sudden spontaneous emergence. It just happens suddenly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like luck of the draw. Some people maybe are lucky to have that spontaneous peak experience that
Yeah, and
that
I mean,
awakens that
if
realization.
you ask people, I mean, when people really begin to really look, they usually can discover peak experiences here and there that they've had in their life.
Is it necessary for a person to experience maybe something like a peak experience or doing this work to move closer towards their own realization, their own self-realization?
Are peak experiences required, you mean, in a sense?
Mhm, mhm.
I don't think so.
No.
No, I mean, I don't know what anyone else would say, but I don't think so. I mean, moving towards self-realization is, if I use that term from a psychosynthesis perspective, it really is asking, what am I called to? And beginning to move in that direction if I'm willing to do that, and to engage or work with the obstacles that appear as I begin to move in that direction.
Yeah, that's really important, I think, to hear you say that that it doesn't require you to have this spontaneous peak experience that really breaks you into this experience of seeking self-realization, but it can be just an ongoing process of every moment to moment in your life. What am I called to in this moment?
Yeah, and then the emphasis is on self-realization, not having peak experiences, or what Assagioli calls superconscious experiences. There's some, differences of opinion probably about that in psychosynthesis, but for us, the focus was on self-realization, not on what? Running after seeking peak experiences or experiences of what we would call the higher unconscious. No, the focus for us is on self-realization. And that's what, I think there's a place in Assagioli's book, there is a place in Assagioli's book where he's talking about the stages of psychosynthesis. And he said, what is the purpose of these stages? And he names three things, three purposes. One is to integrate your personality, which you had referred to earlier, integrating those different parts of ourselves. And then the second was developing right relationships with others. But the third is self-realization. So it's like, again, asking that question or following what our path in life is. You can talk about self-realization as our journey or path in life. What is my path calling me to right now? What's my next step on my path? And if I can get some clarity about that, or even, some clarity, because I don't know if I'll absolutely know for sure, but, occasionally I know for sure. And I begin walking toward that, whatever that is, and I take the first step in that direction. If there's still issues in my personality that are trying to create an obstacle there, then I address those issues. I mean, Assagioli was really clear about, we don't go exploring our unconscious just for the sake of exploring our unconscious. That we are, if I have an issue that I need to attend to, and attending to it and resolving it in this moment in time without knowing the background of it or the unconscious motivations in it, but I can attend to it and it begins to resolve that issue. That's all I need to do. Then I keep moving.
People can get really caught up in, I need to do more work on it, more work on it, more work on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it comes up commonly too in someone who is seeking to know, who believes or, doesn't have a real clear picture, but believes that they've experienced wounding or abuse or something like that in their life. And then they spend an incredible amount of time trying to find out what that was. Sometimes you'll never know what that was. Sometimes you'll never you'll never know consciously what it was that happened to you, but yet something happened to you. So you address you who has been wounded, and you may never know what the wounding was about.
Yeah, I'm reminded of some thoughts again that I had during your class. Really inspired by a lot of things from the psychosynthesis course and the content of psychosynthesis. I was really surprised that there wasn't more psychosynthesis oriented therapists represented at the European Transpersonal Psychology Conference. I hope that in the future we can, change that. This one was in Italy, and there wasn't any that I knew of directly. But I remember that there's a difference or a distinction between self and I. So what is the self that is being realized? I know these are like really deep philosophical questions, but you have the answers and we need them.
What is the self that's being realized? It's the realization is following the invitation. That's the realization. So if you want to, my God is calling me to, and I choose to follow that message. Once I've done some discernment, it's not that I follow it without the discernment. If it feels like that's the right direction for me. That's what I hear. That's what I'm called to. That's the realization, is walking that path in that direction. So you ask
But I know that there are these distinctions between I and self. So is it, these are the ones that are interesting to me.
this is the hardest thing for students to get, because it's the hardest thing to explain. It really
Yeah.
is.
It really is.
Because some people say, okay, I is a projection. I mean, Assagioli said this, I is a projection or a reflection of self at the level of the personality. What does that mean? And then he says, well, there are two selves, I and self, and don't confuse one for the other. And then at this very same time, he says, no, there really aren't two selves. So it's a paradox. So, I mean, one of the best, what we say, John and I, like, I is essentially human spirit. It's who I know myself to be when I have consciousness and vision to recognize the many different parts of me. And I know myself to be distinct from them, but not separate from them.
Yes, yes. That's what I wanted to hear. Yes. So say more. Distinct but not separate from them.
And it's transcendence immanence, and it's just hard to talk to. I mean, hard to talk about.
I didn't know if you were going to say it. I thought I was going to have to say, but yes, so distinct but not separate. My thoughts are that I is sort of more egoic. If I'm thinking from this lens of transpersonal psychology, I is more egoic, so more personality. Ego is not necessarily good or bad. It just is. It is a part of persona and personality. And so this is more the the identity that I identify as. But then the self could be the I that maybe wants most for me, maybe that is most attuned in relationship to a higher consciousness outside of myself that wants me to be moved towards the invitation, to accepting the invitation. And those two things are distinct. Like, don't confuse the two, but are not separate, and such a powerful concept, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we use in the book, or one of the books, we use the analogy of and I'm not even sure I'm going to get this right now. It's like the candle that's reflected in the mirror. The mirror is like self, and the reflection in the mirror is I. And if you remove the mirror, then I disappears. Well, it gets a little too. No, we don't need to go there, actually.
I think that kind of makes sense. I think if I followed that without knowing the rest of that analogy there, it's like our I is always a constructed thing. It's not.
But no, it's not. It's not constructed, actually.
No, okay.
And we don't even say our or the I. It is I without the definite article. And if you read our books, students trip over that. But and it is. It's a language. I mean, like when the Italians translated one of our books, I said you have to leave out the definite article the in front of I and in front of I, and they could not leave it out. They just could not leave it out. So I had to write an introduction in the introduction preface. I had to mention that fact that we don't use an article because that objectifies who we are. We are I. We are not the I. We are not object. We are subject. So it's like, I am the experiencer. I'm not that which is experienced. I am the experiencer. So I am human spirit. I am human and spirit.
I am self.
I am a reflection of self. Assagioli says, make sure you don't, even though he says there's only one, he goes, there's two, and then there's not really two. At some place in his book, he says, don't confuse the two, because he says if you confuse the two, then you get, what's the word? You think you're God, basically, is what he's saying.
Yeah. There's like a spiritual bypass that is happening if you confuse the two. You think you're all powerful or something like that.
There's a great video I use in the module on I and disidentification, and it's a animation, and it shows a ship. I forget, some famous ship from historical times. I forgot whose ship it was, and it says, okay, here's the ship, and this is the original ship, and now the original ship is deteriorating, so they replace this part of it. Is it still the same ship or not? And then it goes on and on and on. And then all of a sudden, all the parts have been replaced. Is it still the same ship? I am always I.
So like the spirit of that ship is the same ship, even though all of those pieces have been replaced, the floor, the everything, the walls, all of it has been replaced. It's still the same ship. How is it the same ship? What makes it? What is the ship? I guess that's the question, but I'm asking this question to you.
No. Maybe what you just said is the spirit of the ship. I don't know. I can't answer for you.
Yeah. But
and then
the ship is the I.
You could probably, if you want to interpret it that way, ship is I.
Yeah. I love this, and I actually forgot that it would go this direction. That's a part of why Psychosynthesis had landed so beautifully for me. I have so many memories of that one class, and I'm sure other people that are taking your class in the counseling psychology programs, we're really blessed to not be, for therapists that are going through the counseling psychology program at Sophia University and other schools like it, but we're really blessed to not be in these sort of conventional programs that would not not entertain a conversation like this, because I think that it's really fascinating when I come across a very intellectual client, somebody that is really intelligent and really interested in the tennis match of these ideas and these concepts. And I think it is valuable for us to have some sort of framework to understand these things. And Roberto Assagioli, the genius that he was, came up with a really beautiful framework in psychosynthesis.
Yeah. And just this is sort of a side note to what you just said, but when you mentioned an intellectual or a more mental client, we don't expect a client to be other than who they are. So if it's a client who's intellectual and mental, that's how we meet them. We don't assume or believe that they have to, quote, be into their feelings. No, that's who they are. We meet them where they are and address whatever they wish to address and come into therapy.
That's really good. So somebody that is not interested in emotions, how is the therapy different than somebody that is interested in emotions?
Well, you would be talking more probably in some language, more mental, intellectual language. However, probably, I'll say this, I don't know this for sure, but probably what brought that client to therapy is probably the need to look at some kind of emotional content, probably. Otherwise, they wouldn't have come to therapy. But their way of addressing it, their issue is more in a mental kind of way, intellectual way. And we don't expect them to be other than who they are. We don't demand that they meet what we believe how someone should be addressing something, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It's much like Carl Rogers' unconditional positive regard for this client as they're there.
Yeah.
It is somebody that is intellectualizing maybe their emotional content that they're needing to work through. How do you get somebody to touch on those things if they're still mental?
I don't get them to do anything.
I don't get them to do anything. Can you say more about that?
Yeah.
I don't get them to do anything. As a therapist, I am not giving them advice to do a thing a certain way. What are you doing as a therapist?
I would be asking them, what is it they want from therapy?
Mm-hmm.
And that's specifically what I want to follow. So I would really be listening very carefully to what they want and reflecting that to make sure I understood it. And that's where we would head off in that direction. One of the things that happens, and I think this is relevant to what we're talking about right now, is that it's really hard to get across to students. I mean, I'm teaching a practicum course right now too. So students are seeing clients for the first time. Is that it's so easy to fall into the trap of talking about whatever it is rather than engaging with whatever it is. So I think that probably is in what we're talking about right now.
So when people are cycling, they are talking about it, and not working with it.
Right. So somebody could be talking about challenging relationship or challenging situation in a relationship. So they're telling me the story of that challenging situation. And so I might ask them, this to go back to Gestalt in a way, I might ask them, if you imagined right now that he or she was in the room with you right now, can you say to him or her what you'd like to say to them? So that's beginning to engage with rather than talking about. And then can you, we might take it further, I'm not sure, but, can you be him or her and respond? Or how do you imagine he or she would respond? And then how do you feel? So so instead of going around and around about what the situation is and the ways it's not working, is having you enter into the situation.
It does make a lot of sense. Engaging with it, it seems very much like the same question on what am I called to do in this moment? What am I called to be? Rather, it seems similar because it's not what am I called to write a list about and think about all these things that I need to do, but rather what am I actually called to be in relationship to in the action of engaging with. I like that a lot. So thank you, Anne. This is an incredible conversation. I think that there's a lot of value that people will get from this. And just introducing to some of the ideas of psychosynthesis is really beautiful. And I love how organic and natural it is for you to just go into your therapeutic place, and it's a beautiful thing. And thank you so much, Anne, for being here. I just want to remind people again that Anne has co-authored 3 books on transpersonal psychology of psychosynthesis with the late husband John Firman. One of those books is this one here, which is Psychosynthesis, a Psychology of the Spirit. Another one was Psychotherapy and Love. But she also has a memoir, Stay Present and Love Him, and it's a memoir of her life with John. And we heard a little bit about that that relationship, how they met and stuff. So I'm sure that that's a really interesting memoir to read.
If people want to know more about psychosynthesis, I and 4 other colleagues have a website called psychosynthesiscircle.com. And on that website, there are audio meditations, there are articles, there are some role play sessions I did with clients. So there's a number of resources on that website if they want to go check it out, if they have interest. So it's psychosynthesiscircle.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Anne. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you. This has been fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Who is this man talking? I'm talking to you. You are the realest one you know. And if you need